Chair will call the December 6, 2022 meeting of the City Council to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Clerk, if you please call the roll.
Will do. Alderman Redpath.
Here.
Alderman Gregory.
Here.
Alderman Williams.
Here.
Alderman Philginzi.
Here.
Alderwoman Purchase.
Here.
Alderwoman DeCenso. Alderman McMenamin.
Here.
Alderwoman Connolly. Alderman Donlin.
Here.
Alderman Hanauer.
Here.
Mayor Langfelder.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, a quorum is present.
Thank you. At this time, the chair recognizes Alderman Redpath.
Thank you, Mayor. To the City Council and to the citizens of Springfield, I'd like to take a few minutes to ask for a moment of silence for two individuals who just passed away this past week. The first one is Sam Montalbano, and Sam was an outstanding public servant who served on the county board for over 30 years. I'm sure the mayor probably served with him back in those days, and he was an Army veteran serving in Korea, and he was a member of the Little Flower Church, of which I'm a member. He was really extraordinary as far as the way he helped and served the community. He always was working for veterans issues, and he was a member of the Inter-Veterans Council, which he also was a member of the Burial Honor Guard, which he served for decades. Sam was always involved in a lot of charity organizations with Friend Indeed and things of that such, and he did a lot of good things for the city. He revitalized the Veterans Day Parade years back to bring it back to where it is today, when it fell off of prominence. So he served his family, he served his friends and his community very well, and he's never turned away anybody. And for those of us from the Little Flower Men's Club, the Little Flower community, today was his funeral. Mayor and I attended that, and I can tell you that he will be extremely missed. The second individual is a little more special to me. It's my cousin. His name is Dick Austin. And Dick Austin was the Sangamon County chairman, county board chairman for several years. He was also the administrator for the Federal General Services Administration under President Reagan. And he served in that capacity, which oversaw an $8 billion budget and 20,000 employees. He's also a veteran, a decorated Marine veteran from the Vietnam War, and after that he served as the Adjutant General for the Illinois National Guard as a Major General. So with that, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for those two individuals, very close community-oriented people who served our community well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
We do have two presentations. One is the first one's the Inspector General with Roger Holmes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Corporation Council. My pleasure to be here tonight. I had a couple of appearances scheduled I had to cancel. I had a bout of RSV thanks to one of my adorable grandchildren, but all is well now, so thank you. All right. Go briefly through these reports. 22 OIG 5. I was contacted by a complainant who I interviewed in person regarding an issue that she lives near a Springfield Aller person on a one-way street that has parking only on complainant's side of the street. Complainant stated that the alderman's lawn service would block her driveway. while servicing the alderman's lawn. Additionally, complainant states that the alderman's guests park in such a way as to block her driveway. Complainant further stated that the alderman addressed complainant's spouse in a disrespectful manner. I was shown a photo of the alleged incident of blocking, which did minimally block a portion of complainant's driveway. This is the only photo which I was shown. I discussed the matter by telephone with the alderman in question, who denied the allegations and stated that complainant's spouse had addressed the alderman using vulgar language. Being a private matter, I am closing this investigation with no recommendation for further action. 22 OIG 6, I received a complaint from a city employee that a coworker who was a night watchman was operating a personal business while on city time. I conducted an in-person interview with the complainant, and we discussed the complainant's right to remain anonymous. I discussed the matter with city supervisor, who had ultimate authority over the behavior of the employee allegedly conducting personal business on city time. Supervisor was very cooperative, but stated that due to union grievance procedures, it would be difficult to pursue this matter without the disclosure and cooperation of complainant as an eyewitness. I contacted complainant with that information and stated that complainant wished to proceed to come forward with an action against respondent. It would be much more likely to succeed. I asked the complainant to think about that option. I have not heard from complainant again. The employee allegedly running the business at night as a night watchman now has a day shift non-watchman position at this facility. This investigation is closed with no action recommended. I received an anonymous email complaint regarding a question of the city clerk awarding 2 employees raises in excess of 5%. Complainant did not make themselves available for an in-person interview. I conducted an extensive interview with City Clerk Lesko regarding the issue raised by the anonymous complainant. Mr. Lesko explained that this was not a situation of a pay raise, but instead through negotiations with AFSCME Local 3738, it was a job reclassification. Previously, the clerk's office had 2 administrative clerk 2 positions, each of which paid an annual salary of $50,000. The newly created positions are administrative coordinator and deputy registrar. Each of these positions contains significant additional duties that were not part of the job description for administrative clerk 2. According to a portion of the union contract which Mr. Lesko provided to me, quote, in the event the employer determines to create a new job classification within the unit during the term of this agreement, the union shall be notified and given the opportunity to negotiate the pay rate. In compliance with this contractual language, Mr. Lesko negotiated with the union and proposed a salary for each of the new positions of $60,000 annually. Following a rejection by the union, final agreement was reached for a salary of $65,000 annually for each position. When the administrative clerk 2 positions were eliminated and the new job classifications were made, the duties were increased to include being on call 24/7, the scanning of all administrative court records to be placed on a public website. In the past, such records were only available by FOIA request. The newly created positions also have the duty of working with the Springfield Public Library to scan records and archives that date as far back as the Lincoln era. Both employees must now be notary public. The 2 new positions require that the employees take home their work laptop to ensure 24/7 access, which is particularly helpful to funeral directors. There will now be 2 trained FOIA officers rather than a previous single position. Mr. Lesko stated he will still have a personnel budget surplus even after the job reclassification. It is my opinion that City Clerk Lesko has fully documented the reclassification of the 2 positions with significant additional duties, and the salary was negotiated as required by the union contract in place. It is my opinion that no impropriety has occurred and that this matter is closed with no recommendation for further action. 22 OIG 9, I was contacted by a complainant who later attended an in-person interview. Complainant was concerned that he was treated rudely by a city employee and described his experience to me. Based upon the situation, it appears that the employee was acting zealously in performing employee's job duties, but may have been overly zealous. I contacted the employee's supervisor and learned that the employee has taken a position in state government and is no longer on the City of Springfield payroll. Therefore, respondent was deprived of the opportunity to respond to the allegations. For these reasons, this investigation is closed with no further action being taken. However, this situation should serve as a reminder to all employees and elected officials that their conduct represents the City of Springfield and that all whom they come in contact with should be treated respectfully. Finally, 2022 OIG 10, I was contacted by email by a complainant who was concerned that City Water, Light, and Power allowed the Wyndham Hotel to incur a bill for utility services in excess of $1 million without collection action being taken when other citizens of Springfield were subject to collection actions. Soon after receiving the complaint, I was advised by the mayor's office that the Wyndham utility bill had been paid in full by wire transfer. I was advised that the Wyndham utility bill was the subject of city council discussions and accrued with the knowledge of the city council. Two compelling reasons for not pursuing payment at an earlier date were that the Wyndham was being considered as a quarantine housing unit for COVID patients during the height of the pandemic. Additionally, I've been advised that the city's 911 antenna is on the top of the Wyndham Hotel and that disconnecting power to the hotel would disable 911 service throughout the area. For the foregoing reasons, I find that this investigation should be closed with no further action or recommendation being made. Are there any questions? All right, thank you. Respectfully submitted.
Thank you. Alderman McMiniman?
Yeah, Judge, Mr. Mayor, didn't we also have a no collection policy during COVID? So that was also part of the situation with the Wyndham, where we were given relief, I think, to a broad category of, I think it was by gubernatorial executive order, as I remember. So we were subject to a much different type of policy during the COVID period on collection matters.
Right. And what was of significance to me is that this council was fully aware of the accruing bill and of course, most significantly, it has recently been paid in full.
Any other questions?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Molly Burns from the Springfield-Sangamon County Regional Planning Commission, and she's going to give the presentation with regards to our request for cannabis grow in industrial areas and other information she's been able to derive from that discussion.
A cup holder.
Molly, that is tiny. That's tiny.
That's why you have a copy of it at your desk.
I saw it.
Yeah, it is, but it's more from a regional standpoint. Thank you very much for inviting me in tonight to discuss what I've discovered for you. And I had an assignment that was given to me when the mayor called after you had some pretty heated discussions here one night about various cannabis businesses being established in town and where they could be and what the city's ordinance looked like. So the mayor gave me a very specific assignment that was endorsed by all of you, and that was to analyze the city's adult use cannabis ordinance related to setback distances, and it was very specific related to those setback distances. So anytime that our staff is given a responsibility like this, the very first thing we do is try to identify or verify if there is a problem. because I went back and listened to the tapes where people had testified about setbacks being problematic to siting businesses, and I wanted to figure out exactly where they were coming from. What we also is look at the city's ordinance as compared to other municipalities. You have a big sheet at your desk as well, and it's a very large spreadsheet of what we learned. The communities that we looked at are Bloomington, Carbondale, Champaign, Danville, Edwardsville, Lincoln, Moline, Normal, Peoria, Quincy, Rock Island, Rockford, Southern View, Urbana, and Sangamon County. That's a big mouthful, but if you look at that list carefully, you will also discover and logically extend that those are some of the communities that I consider to be competitive with Springfield in terms of economic development, in terms of economics, in terms of population, all those kinds of things. So they're very similar in nature. And then the last part of our assignment was to offer some options and based on our research. One of the things that every ordinance have that we looked at is how they define sensitive areas. In some communities, they call them sensitive uses, they call them special areas. For the purposes of tonight, I'm going to refer to them as sensitive areas. Those are the areas that municipalities, including Springfield, identify as being locations that they want to protect from any adverse impact, whether it be a tavern, whether it be a manufacturing facility, whether it be a cannabis business organization. And so the city of Springfield went about theirs by saying that there was a dispensing organization in S3, and you could just read ahead of what those types of things would be prohibited from, that a dispensing organization could not cite itself near that. The other thing is the city of Springfield's organization or ordinance in essence allowing also in S3, it also allows dispensing organizations to be in B1, B2, I1, and I2. So it takes everything that's in the sensitive area, but also says you can't site near a church or a park. And then the craft growers, cultivation center, infuser, processor, transporting organizations, it also talks about everything that's in the sensitive area, but it also adds the area zoned for residential use. And so there's really a three-part definition of what a sensitive area is in the city of Springfield. When we get to the very end where I recommend options, one of the things I would recommend is cleaning up the definition, because you have three different definitions going and no other community looks at it that way. They make a decision on what a sensitive area is and goes with it. I understand that we're a little bit unique, that we have the S3 in the downtown area, and I get that, but other communities have straddled that same burden as well and have figured it out. So I always have a real difficult time trying to figure out distances. In the city of Springfield, the dispensary in the S3 has to be 1,000 feet from a sensitive use. Keep in mind that that's the schools, the daycares, not residential, however. And in the B1, B2, I1, and I2, it's 1,500 from a sensitive use, and it adds churches and parks. And then you can just read from the list what it's required for a cultivation center is 1,500 feet. From a infuser and processor, it's 2,500 feet. And from a transporter, it's 1,500 feet. So there are quite some significant distances there. And as I said, I always have trouble with distances. I didn't play football in high school. I was in the marching band, but even so, getting that 50-yard line and then the 100-yard line, I can't do that. So I always find it's really fun to look at a visual nature. So let's imagine you're standing down here on the street corner after leaving this building. You're right there at the corner from distant municipal east, or municipal west. So if you head north and you get into the middle of the municipal parking garage, you've gone 250 feet. If you go 500 feet, you're at the Abraham Lincoln Hotel. If you go 1,000 feet, you're at Horace Mann. And if you go 1,500 feet, you're down by the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. So think about that for a second. 1,500 feet when you walk out this door is down at the library. And yet some of your setbacks are also use that 1,500 feet, which is quite a long distance when you actually look at it this way. It's 4 to 5 blocks. Makes a big difference. And heading west, obviously, is the same type of thing. To do 1,500 feet, you're down at St. George's Apartments, which is beyond Galena's Pizza. Let's look about it from the Outback Steakhouse. So you're at Outback. 250 feet will get you to the doorway of Beef O'Brady's. 500 feet will get you to Burlington Coat Factory. 1,000 feet will get you down to Chick-fil-A. And 1,500 feet will get you over to Farm and Home. What I'd like you to also do about this map, because we're going to come back to it a little bit later, the significance between this one and the other one is all related to downtown areas, whereas this one crosses an 8-lane highway. It provides a natural break, if you will, between one use versus another. And so kind of keep that in mind, because we'll come back and talk about what could be perceived as objectionable uses, and also how you can write into language where it's okay for those distances not to be the same. A popular place right now is Target. And again, 250 goes down to Constitution Drive, 500 takes you over to Freedom Drive, 1,000 feet between Target and Walmart. That's a long way. Now, when you're sitting on Route 4 waiting to turn in because traffic's bad, you don't think it's very long at all. But it really is when you're talking about businesses being separated. And 1,500 feet will get you down to Wendy's. Now, my very favorite one is the main gate of the State Fairgrounds. And if you're walking in the State Fairgrounds, it's 250 feet to Happy Hollow's old entrance. It's 500 feet to the Milkshake Shack. And it's 1,000 feet to the Coliseum, and it's 1,500 feet to the grandstand. So when you're thinking about leaving the front gate and going to the grandstand, that's quite a long distance. That is also the same distance that you would have to be a infuser from a park or from a residence. So kind of keep those things in mind. So what I did next is looked at the zoning districts and the setbacks. And Steve and Emily on the land use staff were really key and critical in helping with this process. We took the map, and I'm going to step away a little bit from the microphone here, but the large map, and you've got copies of this at your desk. Everything that's in purple or dark red are your industrial or your business zone districts. They're the B1, B2, industrial, I1, I2. So think it in terms of looking at your purple and your dark red. Those are the only places that the craft grower through transporter, cultivation center, infuser are allowed to go per your ordinance. There's not a lot of purple and red on that map. So let's apply the distances to it. We're going to take the northeast quadrant, the big blob of purple up by North Dirksen Parkway, and we're going to look at that. Everything in purple is and red. It's about 540 acres total that you have to work with. Let's add that 1,000 feet buffer. You've just eliminated everything in brown. Let's add the 1,500. Let's add the 2,500. You've made it next to impossible with the current ordinance to cite any other cannabis businesses that are non-dispensaries. Okay? Let's look at another area. Let's look at the east area, which is South Grand Cook, also in the South Dirksen area. That's about 800 acres. Everything you see on this portion of the map is about 800 acres. And there's your 1,000-foot buffer. There's your 1,500-foot buffer. There's your 2,500-foot buffer. Let's look at your next area, which is your southeast area. So it's down by Dirksen Parkway. Again, we picked out areas that had the purple and the red, where your zoning was appropriate for this. And that is about 520 acres. There's your 1,000-foot buffer, 1,500-foot buffer, and your 2,500-foot buffer eliminates all sites. Let's look at South Toronto Road, and this I know was the subject of some conversation at one of the meetings by another presenter one night. Of the purple area right smack dab in the middle of it, which is an industrial park, which was created as an industrial park, zoned for an industrial park, anticipated that businesses would be joining there. Unfortunately, now it's surrounded by a lot of residential, which probably was not the intent for that to be, but it happened. Through previous city council actions where you've kind of inhibited that industrial and business growth by allowing residential around it. So that middle blob, that purple, is 350 acres. And when you put a 1,000-foot buffer on it, it eliminates a lot of it. 1,500 foot, and your 2,500 takes it out of play. Okay, southwest, we're going to look down at the industrial area, down south of 72, again, an industrial park that was created for industrial purposes. And it is approximately 440 acres. There's your 1,000-foot buffer. There's your 1,500-foot buffer. And there's your 2,500-foot buffer. So you say, how did we get like this? Well, the first way we got like this through the zoning and not necessarily being consistent with following the city plan that designates areas for businesses. This is for industrial. We allow things to creep in. That's called spot zoning. Spot zoning is not really defined in zoning law. It's a term of art, shall we say. And basically, it's allowing a property owner to rezone a property to be given a benefit that no one else in their immediate area would be given. So it's earmarked as a little piece, a little spot of zoning that is not necessarily consistent with the rest of the area around it. So how do we fix this problem? First of all, you keep the status quo. The council can make a decision that, in fact, you're okay with limiting the number of cannabis businesses from growing in the city of Springfield. You could just say, you know what, we're good with that, we're fine. The other thing you could do is change your setbacks. If you take a little bit of time to study this very large sheet, there are numbers that pop off the page at me. And this is one of the reasons why my staff and I like doing this kind of research, because when you put it in a spreadsheet, it's like, well, that's pretty obvious. 500 and 250 keep popping up as something that other towns have found to be adequate for their setbacks. The other thing you could do is remove your language, because your language is very specific. When it says there's a 500 or 1,500 feet setback, it says, and this distance shall not be varied. You've removed your ability to grant a variance for whatever reasons. I'm sure legal counsel could chime in at this. I would not necessarily state that providing a variance from a 2,500-foot setback, if you're going to take it down to 300, that's a little extreme. I think that is subject to a lot of scrutiny. But if your setbacks were less, allowing those variances would make sense. The other thing you could do is do both. You could reduce your setbacks, and you could also remove your variance prohibition. If you're going to do variances, I think I would advise that you be very specific about what conditions would need to be met, what type of business it is. My staff and I can help with that, as long with Corporation Counsel, obviously, is very schooled and can help with that. But some very specific conditions to where when a petition is filed, if they're requesting a variance, it goes through planning and zoning, it goes through the scrutiny there, and they can really drill down to find out if those conditions have been met. And I'm not talking about the tavern condition that's like, oh, it's at least 100 foot from a residence. I'm very specific. Are there appropriate protocols in place to make sure that the community and the area around it is not harmed in any way? And we can come up with that list of things. And as long as it meets that, then that variance that work would be done for you at Planning and Zoning Commission, and then bring it here for your approval. But just playing around, let's see what happens when you actually look at, got ahead of myself. The setbacks. And I took 500 and 250 because, again, that was popping off the page. So the northeast section, the one on the left is, if you change that to 500 feet, it still leaves a lot of the purple and the red as available. If you take it down to 250, it does even more. So keeping in mind, this is 250 feet from your current sensitive area definition. So it protects schools, daycares, daycare homes, all of those kinds of things that are in your definition. None of this messes with the definition at all. It just simply draws the maps for you. So let's look at the setbacks options for the east, around South Grand Avenue and Cook Street, on Dirksen also. Again, 500's on your left, 250 is on your right. It opens up a lot of those areas because, quite frankly, in almost every one of these little sectors, it's where the extra warehousing, it's where the businesses or the buildings are available. And so we really are answering two questions. First of all, we're dealing with the setbacks, but you may have an opportunity at that point in time also to help developers fill vacant buildings. Here's your southeast, or your south by Toronto Road. Opens up the middle of that industrial park. And the southwest, again, opens up the industrial park. So that's basically my presentation for tonight. As we were putting this together, the more I thought about it, the more I was hoping that this would spark some conversations for you, spark some thought processes and all of those kinds of things. I did spend some time on the phone with David Lakeman. He's the division manager for the Illinois Department of Agriculture, is under the Cannabis Division. He oversees medicinal, adult use, and the hemp program. And David is the regulator. And I asked him if any other towns to his knowledge, if any other towns in Illinois prohibited variances. He says no. In fact, most of the major ones do allow variances because you can't necessarily put a distance in a perfect situation. So they all allow variances. None of them have been challenged, so that's a good thing. He did also, with what I said earlier, he did also recommend, as long as there's conditions of those. He also indicated that things like craft grow, and you may already know this, their original licenses allow for a 5,000-foot canopy. However, subject to the state approval and additional licenses, that can be expanded up to a 14,000-foot canopy. And so the room for a building to grow, I think, is something that is necessary. But having that room for a developer to look at a way something grows, I think, is important because with your limitations so much, somebody may invest in the 5,000, but maybe not make it bigger to go to 12,000. So you have to be mindful that if you want to allow a craft grower or infuser or a cultivation center to be placed in Springfield, that there is ample space for it to expand. It is cheaper to add on to a building as licenses change or as the state ups the regulatory square footage and those kinds of things than it is to scrap that one and build another building. And so I think from a development and economic development standpoint, the council would be wise to kind of think that through and think, how would you like to handle that? So we stand ready to help in any way we can. I'll entertain any questions.
Alderman Hanauer.
Yeah, thank you. Molly, thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate the spreadsheet that shows the differences. First of all, keep in mind that when we passed allowing cannabis in the city of Springfield, there was a lot of people that were against it. And part of the setbacks were part of the negotiations, and I believe Senator Turner was really involved in it. And that's what it took in order to get cannabis in Springfield, or we would have been like Bloomington, where it was just straight prohibited. The 2,500 on the cultivation and infusion. Originally, when we started this, we had a 2,500 straight across the board. And I think what we did, and I think it was just a general mistake, it was something we left out, but we switched it from 2,500 to 1,500 because we found that the 2,500 was too, it blocked too many things. And I think we left out the cultivation, infusion, and the processor. And I think that was definitely something that probably needs to be brought back and adjusted, because whatever we do, it should be, in my mind, the same across the board. My concern is, we did a lot of negotiate. Well, I didn't, but Senator Turner and people did a lot of negotiation to get this in here, and we keep chipping away at it. And we don't need these distribution centers to be like Walgreens, where they're on every corner. I don't think Springfield wants that. And I think a lot of the problems could be solved just simply. A good example, the old Ned Kelly's building over by Target. It's 1,450 feet from a church that's across a 6-lane highway. And I mean, it would be simple just if you did it based on how do you get there? Not as the crow flies. I know that's the easiest way by map, but And that's caused a lot of issues, you know. That'd be a perfect place for you know, any one of these, you know. And it's a building that's out of the way. People, you know, and I know that because people have come to me, and it's always come up, you know. And look, I'm just not in favor of going down 250 feet. I mean, that's totally against what we negotiated. You know, we're going back on what we negotiated, and you know, I just don't agree with that. You know, maybe 1,000 feet. I don't know, 500 or 1,000 feet, and do something where if there's a divided highway there, or you know, we put some language in. I don't know. I think that would work in 90% of the cases. And you know, as far as that allowing variances, then we got to have structure of how close we can allow it, no matter what. Because otherwise, somebody's going to throw a variance. There'll be a craft grow right in the middle of a neighborhood, and I just don't think that that's right. You know, I just go back to what we negotiated as a council with people. A lot of the people that complain. Some of you weren't on the council then, but it was real. And this was a big thing just to even get the 2,500 at the time in order to allow it. And there was many of us on this council that took calls with people that were not happy because they thought we legalized cannabis in Springfield. And we had to explain to them, we didn't legalize it. That was done at the state level. What we're doing is we're going to allow it, but we're going to tax it. We're going to monitor it, and this is how we're doing it. And if we keep lowering it, keep chipping away, I feel like we're just totally going away from that. So with that, again, thank you very much. This is very helpful.
Well, and to be clear, I'm not advocating for this. I don't take positions. That's for you all to do.
I didn't intend
No,
to say
I know that.
you did.
I present information, but for anybody else who's watching and stuff, I'm not advocating a position one way or the other. I took it down to 500 and 250 because that's what other towns have done, thinking that it would give you also the mapping to look at the most extreme and the lesser, and you know then 1,000's relatively halfway in between. So it gives you some thought process. My job is to present the information. Your job is to make the decisions.
Alderman Gregory.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Molly, for this great presentation and this spreadsheet. I think it really illustrates, you know, some opportunities for our cities to grow in this industry. I was part of those discussions with the boundaries issues, and that, you know, when it first came out, nobody really knew what we had, you know, but we did approve one downtown, and it's, you know, outside of all of these rules, and it's, you know, it has this druthers, but it's working, and you know, 76 or 75% of America agrees that this product should be legal. So, you know, there's a consensus that it should be legal, and I think us as a city, we have to look at this because, you know, one of the things that concerns me, you know, in the east part or the southeast example that you gave is that, you know, where we're at 1,000 feet, it really limits opportunity for anyone to operate a cannabis industry over on my side of town, you know, and you know, in this state for this particular product, you know, it had major emphasis on minority ownership, and you know, there's some people out there that really want to you know, be the first, you know, in this industry, in this town, but they're having some problems with these setbacks, and I think that we should consider whether you know, we have a subcommittee to talk about it, or work with Ms. Molly to get us some variance. I definitely think that we should have a variance language in there. I think that will help us out in many ways. But I do think we need to consider adjusting it down. I mean, we see in other towns that sometimes we brag on, like Peoria and Champaign and things that we like that they do. And, you know, they have some setbacks that are drastically lower than ours. So I just don't see you know, how we can be so particular with it and you know, hold it so far. I'm not advocating for it to be next door to anyone's houses, church, or daycare, but I do think there's some spots, and you know, I'm very, very keen on the variance section, because I do think there's some spots, not only where you're talking about, Mr. Hanauer, but out on the north side, there's another situation, a commercial building out there, and guess what? It's got 4 lanes of highway and some distance before it even reaches a house, but it's out because of these guidelines. So we have some opportunity here. There's other cities that opted out, like that's on this sheet, Decatur, and their residents are upset because they don't get any revenue to do whatever they decided that they wanted to do. I think we have an opportunity to adjust it and make it better for our city and still thrive. So thank you.
Alderman Redpath.
The proposal that was brought to us a while back to change the zoning was ridiculous. It was to completely wipe out the zoning and setbacks, which is not something we can do. We all fielded questions and concerns of outrage from citizens about that. There is room in this, though, for variances. I think a variance change, being able to give a variance in specific situations is the right way to go. I could support that, but but we still have to make sure, like everybody says here, there has to be sensitive zones that have to be considered, and we can't just blanket the whole city with a different variance change. It has to be gradual, and it has to be thought out. The most important thing is that we want to protect our residential, our sensitive areas like parks, schools, and churches. And if we can come up with a opportunity to change that with variances, I could vote for a variance if some individual brought something to the city council and said, look, this is the parameters of this thing, and this is how this is going, and we're not close to this kind of thing in an area, I could vote for it. I'm not going to vote for blanket change, and that's what changed my mind on the vote last time. Is my constituents and people from out the city said, you're going too far too fast. It's like the electric car. It's too fast. You got to remember, we still need coal. So,
Alderman Donlin.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and Molly, thank you again for a well-thought-out, good presentation. It's very helpful to have this information, and I intend on taking a closer look at it after the meeting. But remember when this topic first came about, that I think it was the consensus of the council that we tread lightly and be careful. It was all brand new. The state just passed the law, and we were trying to tiptoe into this industry as a whole, and I think did a responsible job of doing just that. The proposal that Alderman Redpath mentioned, wasn't for it, just due to the blanket nature of it all. However, I am receptive to the thought of, exploring a variance process in the future. I think that makes sense. We do it with other types of businesses and zoning. It's very common, as long as it's well thought out. I think that maybe the 2,500 in particular, and maybe even the 1,500 might be a bit too long, maybe something negotiated. But really what I'm getting at, Molly, is what do you suggest our next step be as a council? Because this is a new area, and when we consider changes such as this that impact zoning and plans and so forth, I like at times to rely on the experts and those who do this and quite frankly don't have a political glasses on and just do it from a professional standpoint. So I'd be curious to what your answer is. What do you think our next step ought to be?
I think you ought to study some of the information I gave you.
Okay.
And if you have questions, reach out and we can answer questions. Reach out to Mr. Griffin. He can put it on an email chain to where everybody gets the same answer and all that kind of stuff. And really think through, think back to when you originally passed the ordinance, what some of the objections were, and then juxtapose that with this information. Also balance it with, I would, if I were in your shoes, I would balance it with some of the vacant buildings and some of the vacant areas that have not been used for other purposes. I would also spend some time online. I randomly Googled infuser organizations in Illinois. There's a picture of the first infuser organization that was in Pekin, and it looks like a real estate office. It's large, it's 5,000 feet. The inside of it looks like a bakery, but you can actually see what it looks like. In my conversations with David Lake, there's no signage. There's nothing to know that it's there. It's just a standard business, unless you know what Crown LLC, that's Crown with the K, by the way, KROWN LLC in Pekin, Illinois. Unless you know what it is, you don't know driving by. There's no no connection whatsoever. My point to this is kind of think about, do the objections that you might have had, your constituents might have had several years ago, still stand? Now that we know more about the organizations, now that we know more about the industries, things that people were anticipating in terms of smell, negative impact, all those kinds of things, did those really come to fruition?
In your research, have you, speaking of that in particular, in your research for the craft growers and the cultivation infusion facilities, what have been the issues?
The issues primarily have been at the political the political level, getting them cited more than anything. And David Lakeman can actually speak to this more than I can. And he's asked me to tell you that if at some point in time you would like him to be a guest speaker and here available to answer questions of his experience of managing these programs on a statewide basis, he would be happy to come, and he's based in Springfield.
I think it would be helpful because this is all new,
Right.
and although the concern, I appreciate when residents make concerns and there are unknowns but if we've had these types of facilities placed in other areas of the state, other cities,
Right.
I'd be curious to, after the fact, after they've been up and running, to hear what would have been the issues, if any at all.
Well, not only that, David also started the program in Massachusetts. So
Okay.
he's got 2 states under his belt. And then he and his wife moved back here and
Well, I
because
would
they're
welcome
local
that, Mayor.
kids.
I don't know how you
So, yeah,
feel
and
about
so one of the things, the anecdotal things that he mentioned that would be the number one thing, if I would have been an elected official at the time, I would have been concerned about, I'm sure it went through everybody's mind, is are there problems with crime or increased crime around these areas? You would naturally think that there might be. And David told me, actually, the incidences of crime have gone down in areas where you have a facility sited, and that's because of the use of lighting and security cameras and security guards. And that is a nationwide statistic, that crime in an area has actually gone down. So and he's got more statistics than I have. So that is one of those things that I think was surprising to me. You ask what would be surprising. I think I would be thinking about how each of the businesses is different from another. Cultivation center requires a lot of water. They're very large by nature. They have different ventilation systems and those kinds of things. So looking at how that is different from a craft grower, which is very smaller scale, more enclosed area, less opportunity for odors and aromas to escape, versus an infuser where it is coming in on an oil level. So I think that being able to bifurcate through each of those and separate them out, instead of treating it as dispensaries versus everything else, maybe look more at each of those industries and learn about that. So if I were an alderman, that's what I would suggest, starting to really delve down and to learn about each of those, because I think from that, your setback issues will shake out more readily and more easily, because people just know more. In all likelihood, I don't think that City of Springfield is going to, in my opinion, and I hope I'm wrong in a way because of the tax revenue, if that's what the city wants to have happen, but a cultivation center takes a lot of space. Those would be probably more appropriately sited further out in the country or in a municipality where it's not as compact and contiguous as Springfield is. So it's not likely going to change. Cultivation centers also are very expensive to set up, so it's very likely that anybody who builds a cultivation center will want room on site to expand. So that limits where those can go in the city of Springfield. Infusers, craft grow, that's not the case. It takes a lot less space. They have fewer employees, so you have a lot fewer parking needs. You don't have to be on a major highway like you would with a transporter and a cultivation center to get trucks in and out. So there's all kinds of those considerations that I'd recommend you kind of bone up and learn a little bit more about, and with that would be able to kind of eliminate out some of the objectionable influences that you might have thought exist that don't. I've been surprised at some of the stuff the more I've learned.
Well, thank you for that insight, and we'll do our homework. I appreciate it.
And if I can help in any way, I'd be happy to.
Thank you. I know.
So thank you very much for this. Thank you. And yes, we need to hear from your guy. If we can get him here, Mayor, because I think education is the key to all this. I brought forth that industrial usage for industrial parks because in my mind, I saw a plant growing in a building. Where's the harm? Some of the locations I drove them, I looked, people pass by them right now every day, and they don't know what's going on there. And they would have to have an intention to stop and figure out what's going there, and they'll still be driving by them if they were a craft grow today. I had a ward full of empty buildings, buildings that could be utilized that are still sitting empty because of the boogeyman, because we don't understand. So I want the education. I want studies like this, because what happens when we don't, we lose them to other towns, to the Lincolns, and to, they read Danville's. These are my constituents who had the licenses that moved and went other places. That's I heard on Springfield. Our boogeyman syndrome puts us behind the ball, and then we get all these communities that do it before us. It ain't too new. A lot of municipalities are doing it and have it going on. I won't argue the 250 versus the 5. Let's just get together and allow people to do something, because the status quo is not working, in particular for the east side. For the northeast and the southeast, we just can't get it done because of our own rules and regulations and our setbacks that this council puts on itself. It ain't even that the setbacks are coming from the state in some situations. So all I'm saying is, if this guy comes and explains more, because the more I learn about it, the more I'm like, well, why are we making this so hard? Them industrial parks right now are doing things much more harmful today than a plant growing in a building. Some people didn't even know that the smell was regulated. Certain things had to happen, certain filters, they don't know. So we all have to get on this education curve, educate ourselves, and quit being, it reminds me of gaming all over again. You know, when something's new, the boogeyman. Oh, we're going to fall apart. Even some of the groups who asked to use marijuana money from the grants that we put out were the same groups that was against it at first. But now that it's here and the money became, all of a sudden, yeah, we want to use it. So it's a learning curve. And when something's new, I guess there's this natural resistance. Maybe we need to do a better job of explaining it or educating ourselves and our public so that we can finally do something. Because if we don't, I see on here Southern View already. I imagine we'll see Grandview, we'll see some of these surrounding communities beat us to the punch because we're playing boogeyman. So thank you for coming. I appreciate this, and I need more information. Thank you.
If I might, Mayor, Grandview has an ordinance. We just couldn't get a copy of it in time for this meeting. So they have a dispensary, and they do have an ordinance. Yeah. If I could say something, you mentioned Danville. If I could say something about Danville and Peoria, specifically those two, because I know that they've been used in debate before. If you'll notice we've talked about where the purple and the red dots are, and there's also a line of red and purple that goes right up 11th Street, 10th Street, that's the rail corridor. Back in the day when Springfield in the early 1900s was a very industrial area and then zoning happened, that area had the industrial pieces of it up and down the roadway, or up and down the railroad, and we all know what that is. It still exists to some extent. A lot of houses then were built adjacent to that because the owners of those businesses would build housing for their employees, which quite frankly is how we ended up with neighborhoods like Harvard Park and Pioneer Park and various other entities up and down 11th Street corridor. There simply isn't the space in any of those locations to probably site any sort of a business of this nature. However, one of the things that one of the other presenters brought up was that, well, we haven't been successful, we're going to go to Danville. There are several things that Danville and Peoria have that Springfield does not have. And that is that back in the 80s, Danville built an industrial park for one reason and one reason only, and it was called General Motors. They were building a very large car factory there. And so they went out way, 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 way far away from Danville proper and annexed it in with a little strip of land. But it's an industrial park that's set aside. GM's now gone. But that redeveloped as an industrial park, so there were no houses around it. It was designed for there not to be houses or schools or parks or daycares or anything like that. Peoria has the same thing. It's called Caterpillar. It went out and they separated it out as they would move away from the river and expand their facilities and those kinds of things. They would move further and further out. Rock Island Moline has John Deere. So to some extent, that development was driving the location of industrially zoned property that occurred in the, let's call it the 50s through the 2000s, for that 50-year period. That's what those towns have that Springfield does not have. Our industrial parks that have been developed in Springfield have been extremely close to the city limits. And why? Because those places needed water. And so they were annexed into the city. They needed power. They needed to be able to be close to that. The other towns typically invested and did their utilities and their water in a different manner than Springfield is. I'm not saying Springfield did it wrong. I'm just pointing that out, that's why some of the siting has been more successful in a Danville or a Peoria or Rock Island Moline to allow that, because they don't have, even though they have a sensitive area definition, people don't have to deal with it because there aren't any houses around the industrial zoned areas. So just kind of keep that in mind. And what that means to me is it's a special challenge for Springfield, but it's not an insurmountable one. It just has to be thought through very carefully, and it can be done.
Alderman Hanauer.
Yeah, real quick on the transportation stuff that I don't know, honestly, one of the problems that we have with the transportation issues, they use their facility more for basically, because we have one out in Ward 10, and basically they drive in a building. It looks like the FBI building basically with everything around it. But they drive one van in, they separate, they just, into other vans, and then they leave. They don't want people to know. There's no, with the exception of all the security cameras and stuff, you'd never know what's going on there. And I do agree that those kind of things, they don't need as big a setback. I would argue even the infusion might not be. I don't know enough about the infusion, but again, that's an area. One of the problems that we had is they don't want it to come through a zoning because they don't want people to know it's there. You're drawing attention to it, and that. Look, I'm willing to sit down and talk about this. I think that there's some adjustments that we can make, but I think that I'm just not. Again, my concern is if we go to 500, somebody's going to want 250. We go to 250, somebody's going to want 100. We go to 100, somebody's going to want 50. And I just don't think it's fair that when we've negotiated this, because if we would have had 500 when we first voted on all this, we would not have this discussion because it would not be in Springfield. I can tell you that it would have failed huge. And but I do agree with some of these, the way they're working after what they're doing. They probably don't need as big a setbacks, but I'm a big believer that we have to have some decent setbacks, and I'm not opposed to variances, only what we got to limit what they can vary, and within a certain percentage or whatever. Because if something is 1,000 feet and they're 50 feet short or something like that, do we allow it, or a certain percentage? But I'm willing to listen at least, and but I just don't think that we can go. I don't think we want a full swing at this thing. I'm concerned about that. So, but again, thank you.
Any other questions or discussions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Thank you, Molly.
Chair will entertain a motion to dispense with the reading of the minutes of the November 15th, 2022 City Council meeting and approve the minutes.
So moved.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Chair will entertain a motion to incorporate the pre-council reading of first reading of ordinances in the record of this City Council meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. The chair will entertain a motion to incorporate the pre-council reading of the consent agenda into the record of the city council meeting.
So moved.
Been moved and second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Chair will entertain a motion to place the consent agenda on final passage.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and second. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, vote yes. Those opposed, vote no. The voting is now open.
Come on, Ralph.
And the consent agenda passes 7 voting yes, none voting no. Agenda number 2022-384 and 2022-463 remain tabled or in committee. Next item on the agenda is 2022-497, an ordinance authorizing the purchase of 5 Ford F-150 pickup trucks from Morrow Brothers Ford, Inc., off Office State Contract Number 21-416, CMS-BOSS 4-B-29479, in an amount not to exceed $202,605 for the Office of Public Utilities. Chair will entertain a motion to place agenda number 2022-497 on final passage. Alderman Donlin. Or are we going to move for discussion or passage, or
I'll make a
What's the
motion for
pleasure?
discussion.
Second.
move for discussion and second? Yes, Alderman Donlin.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question. I'm still a little bit confused based on the explanation that was provided last week, whether it's 4, 5, or 6 vehicles and what vehicles are replacing which ones. And so if the utility could come up and explain that to us, that would be wonderful.
So there are basically 5 vehicles that are being purchased under a state contract. One is, well, there's 4 of those that are being purchased are going to be replacing vehicles that are going to be shifted to the power plant. One is actually a pool vehicle. That's a new one that we've been lacking for a while to go towards a supervisor and engineers for the engineering group. So that's the vehicle that they would use to like go out and look at things when they're trying to design things. They would need that vehicle as a pool vehicle for their use. And then there's one that's actually the one that's going to the power plant. There's one of them that's actually technically going to the grocery stores, and then the grocery store vehicle is going to the power plant. So in essence, and eventually there's 4 vehicles that are going to be at the power plant that are replacing outdated vehicles that we need.
So there's 5 new vehicles being purchased?
Correct.
Okay, so where did this number 6 come from? That's what the original explanation, was that just a typo, or?
Oh, yes.
Well, there you have it.
There you have it.
No, I have been asked, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, Mr. Brown, that, and it's always been a bone of contention, and so I am going to ask that, explain to us why, and I don't mean to diminish the professionalism and of any supervisor at the utility, but people ask, how come the supervisors need the new vehicles, and the ones we're handing down to the power plant, the mileage on those are, it's not, I know one of them was 110, but the others are relatively low in the scheme of life. So explain to us what's going on there.
Right. So in essence, what happens with those is that once they hit about, this is on average, about 7 years of life on a vehicle, that those, like, the supervisors are using those on a daily basis to go out into the city and look at, this is for the T&D group. So those supervisors are out on a daily basis, and it could be on call outs too at night, those kinds of things. So they're always looking, always driving around the city, looking at different jobs. And then once they hit enough usage, basically about 7-year mark, the annual maintenance on those increase dramatically for the everyday constant use like that, where they're always driving around. And what they found is that if they transfer them basically to like the power plant where they're used kind of on-site grounds, or going over to visit some of the turbines as well, but that's less frequent. But on plant grounds, the activities associated with that, the maintenance, they can manage that. So that's why they've developed that kind of pattern of how those vehicles are handled.
So we're not talking about, I guess to the heart of the question, we're not talking about, and again, no offense to anybody, but we're not talking about the upper CWLP management. This isn't the take-home vehicles and are driving to and from work. We're talking about the individuals who are out looking at projects and managing people.
Correct.
On an hourly basis.
Yeah, we've stopped, the upper management type vehicles that used to be out, I guess that would have been probably like, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago, where, like even I think my position would have had a vehicle back then, but we've stopped that quite a few years ago. So now it's just the supervisors or superintendents that really for the T&D group, they're the ones that are driving these vehicles, conducting business across the city. That's for electric and water.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Brown. Appreciate it.
Alderman Hanauer?
So what's the mileage of the vehicles they're replacing out at the power plant then? Because the mileage I'm seeing on here, no offense, but I think a lot of us up here, well, except for probably Chuck and Lakeisha, we drive cars with a heck of a lot more miles on them than what you're replacing.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, this one here has got 281,000 miles on it, 195,000 on another one. And you got to realize
Are these the ones out at the power plant you're replacing?
Yeah, the ones at the power plant too. Once they hit those kinds of miles, the conditions, the site conditions for those vehicles it's at a much more higher extreme level than us traveling on the streets.
Mayor, if I can, just as I think what would be helpful is, because these 200,000 plus mile, that you just mentioned, that's not in the description that we were given.
Right.
It may be buried deep in the ordinance, I don't know, but next time you guys purchase vehicles, I would itemize that so we have a better feel of the flow. In other words, like you just said, 200,000 miles, that's a lot of miles. We all understand that. I think anybody that drives a vehicle can understand that. But the ones that we saw on our summary is that you're replacing, you have a truck with 72,000 miles on it, 52,000 miles on it, even 95 we can argue is low, but that's the numbers that we saw. So does that make sense why we're asking these questions? Okay.
Well, I'm a little concerned, and I'm a little concerned because once again we get into this whole deal with the garage, and I don't see a 50 and a 72,000 mile truck. It should not. These trucks are built to go a long time, and the maintenance costs on them shouldn't get any more at 72,000 unless that's the way they're sticking the other departments. And I mean, we've had this discussion about how the maintenance thing is done, and I just really that doesn't make sense to me. And I know that they have, I don't know whether they have stair steps on this or not, but as long as you change the oil and you do what you're supposed to, it shouldn't cost you that much for these vehicles annually. And in real life, I don't know about how we do it at our garage, but I don't have a problem passing them down but I'm like Alderman Donlin. I started seeing some of the mileage of these trucks that we were getting rid of, and it's like, nah, they need to drive these a lot longer. And I realize the harshness of what goes on out at the power plant and what it does to the vehicles out there. But if they're only driving just a little bit around there too, they can drive cars for a long time.
And they do. I mean, they get in some really bad conditions. Typically, they get redlined by the garage. Basically deemed no safer to drive. I mean, I've seen it myself. For different years where they're driving, vehicles with holes in the floorboard. So that's what we're trying to prevent, is to where we have a lot of our vehicle fleet just demolished. As far as they can't even drive where they're redlined. Where the vehicles that were that we're replacing directly, they're showing you the mileage and it's low, but we're transferring those vehicles. So they're not being sold. They're not being, traded in. We're going to use those at the power plant to replace it. So I can see where Alderman Dolan wants the trail, and I sent the email yesterday kind of explaining that in more detail. So in the next time we can make sure that they kind of give that more detailed explanation, if they can fit that in the ordinance.
Aren't these trucks going to be utilized, these used ones? Aren't you going to pass them along elsewhere in the plant? I mean, we're not selling them.
No, the ones that are in the power plant, the ones that are like 200,000, this is roughly, those I believe they're going to be
Well,
let
the
go.
ones listed here are going to be handed down. They're going to be hand-me-down somewhere.
Correct.
Yes. And
Yes.
still used at CWLP.
Yes, that's why they're going to the power plant.
Right. Very good. Alderman McMiniman.
Yeah, I understand the concerns about driving these vehicles as long as we can. I mean, my vehicle outside has 200,000 miles on it. It's a Sonata bought in 2006, so I understand about, you try to drive these vehicles as long as you can, but we don't want the battery to go wrong. We don't want the door handle to break. We don't want the brakes to go bad on people who've got to get up and work 5 days a week and be dependable on their vehicle. And I think some of these mileages we're given here, I got 110,000 for one, 95,000 for another. But the point is, these are all going to be 8-year-old vehicles. And when the brakes start going bad, sometimes transmission can go bad. A lot of things can go bad. So I don't have a problem with us honoring what we put in the budget. We put these vehicles in a budget. And I also see in the description here, so we're just kind of doing what we approved with the budget. And I also see in here that we saw an opportunity to link in with the state bidding process for F-150s, where we're saving $40,000 by purchasing some of these F-150s. So our utility is looking out there for theoretically some bargains out there that might not exist a year from now or 2 years from now. So I think we got to be careful about micromanaging, this kind of activity when we're not in a fiscal crisis currently. If we were, watching every dollar, I can see going at this micro level to, second guess an F-150 truck purchase. So that's my comments, Mr. Mayor.
Any other discussion? Is there a motion on the ordinance?
Motion to pass.
Second.
Been moved second to pass. Any discussion on that? All in favor of the motion, vote yes. Those opposed, vote no. The voting is now open. And the ordinance passes 8 voting yes, none voting no. Next item on the agenda is 2022-499, an ordinance authorizing execution of a redevelopment agreement with Acre Company LLC for financial assistance for the property located at 526 East Adams Street and 4 Old State Capitol Plaza, utilizing Central Area's tax increment finance funds through the Office of Planning and Economic Development for an amount not to exceed $562,140. Chair will entertain a motion to place agenda number 2022-499 on final passage.
Mayor, I move to hold ordinance 2022-499. There are some areas that I need some clarity on, so I would like to hold this ordinance.
Second.
Well, the developer's here, so I'd ask, he's been here, I think, I wasn't here, but he was here at the last meeting. I'd entertain we can send it back to committee, but due to his time, I think it'd be good to ask any questions or provide any discussion, so he doesn't have to come back on a regular basis. So if that's entertained, I think we can send it back to committee if so choosing, but since he's here, been here twice now, and nobody's asked a question, I think it's prudent that we do ask him some questions or ask clarity that he'd be able to provide.
That's fine. So I'll take that motion off the table and I make a motion for discussion.
Second.
Mayor, real quick.
Oh, sorry, Alderman Hanauer.
I think we have quite a few technical issues in both the ordinance and in the redevelopers agreement. I don't have the redevelopers agreement printed out, but I think he was gonna get a lot more money than what he was asking for, because I think it was $562 million is what we had in the developers agreement. And I think that's one that we just need to get some things cleaned up and, you know, before we move forward. I think that's a concern that I have, but,
You don't need a half a
anxious
billion,
to
do
hear
you?
about the project.
Yeah,
Yeah, you'd like to have that $562 million, wouldn't it?
If you'd
Yeah, I
state your
wish-
name and address for the council, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. My name's Aaron Akery, and I'm the owner of Akery Company LLC. I'm currently owner of the building that was stated earlier. It is a building that is currently inhabitable, both the business and residential. About 3 years ago, actually, the building roof collapsed, and we have since rebuilt that and reframed all the floors. So the building is structurally sound, but it still is in dire need of completely reconstructed. The amount that I'm asking for is $562,140, not $562 million. The reason for this large number is the fact that the cost with prevailing wage to reconstruct the building, to bring it up to city code, we have a bid of $1.7 million. The building has been appraised, and appraises with all the updates at $1.1 million, which leaves a financial gap quite large. So I've already got approved loan with the Bank of Springfield for $915,000, and I am going to contribute another $280,000, which leaves a difference of the $562,000 that I'm asking with TIF. It is a 9-unit residential apartment, constructing of 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom apartments. 5 of those units will be ADA compatible. It will be a fully sprinkled building with a modernized elevator. The location of the building has the underground parking right underneath the old state capitol, so parking will be ideal. I think this is a great location for residential apartments, being in the heart of Springfield. You've got the medical district close by, so I don't think filling the apartments will be a problem. Open to questions.
Thank you. Alderman Redpath?
He answered my question, Mayor. Thank you.
Alderwoman Purchase?
Is this something that can be a minor tweak that can be adjusted quickly with the discrepancy in the numbers in a developer's contract versus what he's asking for? Can that be taken care
Oh,
of?
yeah, well, actually, what's in the ordinance is what's voted on, but Corporation Council can, speak to the developer's agreement associated with the cost.
Yeah,
but
very
it is a
quickly, I was
Scrivener's error.
trying to quickly look at it. It specifically says 562, well, yeah, there's clearly a typo there
Lot of
that can be
zeros in
corrected.
there, Jim.
Yeah, there's 2 extra zeros with another period.
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
another zero.
Yeah,
Actually, verbiage-wise, they've also spelled out 562 million in verbiage on both the second page and the third page.
yes, and that's a typo and can be corrected. The development agreement is an attachment to the ordinance. The ordinance is the controlling document. So the, if you will, typos involved can be reconciled to that.
Okay.
Yes. And the ordinance is the actual, that's the authorization. So what's in the ordinance can never be exceeded,
Okay.
if that helps.
Alderman McMinimum?
Mr. Ackery, you're taking on a very difficult project.
Yes.
And an important project. You're immediately south of the old state capitol.
Correct.
It's where people congregate historically.
Correct.
It's a really important area. I think the per unit cost here is not too different than the per unit cost of a recent housing complex on the east side, and not too dissimilar from the one on the west side at Pine Creek, at Pine Woods Apartments. You've got a more challenging project because the buildings are so much older. I sure respect your investment in this. It's kind of, you're asking for the money, and I think by council policy, an ordinance that Alderman Donlin pursued, we don't give you this TIF money until the project is completed. And are you aware of that?
Well, it was presented to me that it would be given out in thirds.
In thirds? So, are you aware of that?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Okay. So that would be something we'd have to, is it spelled out? We're allowed to deviate from,
We approve it, right?
if we approve it.
Correct.
Is that spelled out then in the redevelopment agreement? Okay, so that's.
And all of these are always going to be based on when you may recall, all of these are always based on when the work is done. It's never in advance of work being completed or bills being presented or lien waivers being done and so on. So it's always in arrears to the work actually being done.
That's true, but we do have in the code now language that says that the entire project has to be completed before we release the TIF money. That was a ordinance.
Unless otherwise approved.
Unless otherwise approved in the approval ordinance and redevelopment agreement.
That is correct.
Okay. Well, I'm a yes vote on this. I think you're doing something that we need to do downtown. We've had some bad luck on some of the other redevelopment projects downtown. I see there's another important one on first reading tonight that hopefully will get some steam that we're going to hear about, I think, at the next meeting, which is, I think, 130 units, 136 at the corner of 5th and
Jefferson.
Jefferson, Madison, excuse me. Yeah, I can remember when Alderman Corey Jobe was here, and he said he wasn't going to approve any more TIF money for downtown unless it was for residential housing. That's how important he thought this was to repopulate our downtown and get foot traffic going downtown. So I'm a yes vote on this if the modifications are acceptable to Alderwoman Purchase that we discussed without the numbers being correct.
Alderman Donlin?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Let me just be clear. Is this the Robbie's building? That's what.
It is part, well, the 2 floors above Robbie's is part of it, and then the 3 stories just to the east as well.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's a key part of our downtown. It is, I mean, it has been for 150 plus years.
Yeah.
And doing these types of projects is not easy, is not inexpensive. You well know that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be here tonight. And I appreciate your interest in trying to better downtown. It's 12 units total, isn't that right? 12 residential?
9.
9, excuse me.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that should be done, and I appreciate the questions about the errors in the ordinance and the redevelopment agreement, because it is dramatically different. But what you described and what we've been provided here this evening with images is a big deal and would change downtown, and I intend on voting for it. But out of curiosity, though, because I used to work in the building next door,
Sure.
the old chamber building, is that a part of it, or is that a separate
The
structure?
chamber was in this building at one
Oh,
time.
it was? Okay, it is a
Yep.
part of that building. Okay, now I get it.
Yep.
I get what you're saying, okay. Well, thank you.
Yep.
And good luck to you.
Thanks.
But the spirit, to Alderman, to your point, the spirit of the change that we made is we didn't want to be in a position when we passed that ordinance that we've provided, let's just make up a number, we've provided hundreds of thousands of dollars up front, and the work hasn't been done, and then the developer decides that we can't do the project now, and we've expended all this money. The way that it's been described is, as the work is done, monies will be released accordingly, and obviously documentation has to be provided that the work has been done and it's eligible project cost pursuant to the TIF Act and our code. So I appreciate your patience and, again, your interest in downtown. Thank you.
Any other questions? So is there any further motion or send back to committee, or?
No, I would like to make a motion to approve 2022-499.
Do we have to amend it, though, to make the changes?
If the motion, the ordinance is correct on its face. If you want to just simply include in the development agreement shall be consistent with the ordinance, which is, of course, the intent.
So it should read an ordinance authorizing the execution of a redevelopment agreement in accordance with the ordinance.
Mayor, if I can, just as a point of
Alderman Donlin.
point of order here, clarification, I guess I should say. I think it's clear that the intent, based on the discussion, is that the TIF reimbursement amount shall not exceed $562,142.
Correct.
So that's 562, 140. So if the ordinance and the redevelopment agreement could reflect that, that would be wonderful.
And the ordinance does reflect that? in the
Ordinance has
authorization?
got some typos in it that has some extra zeros and periods. I think that's the reason for the conversation in the first place. So, and then one of the whereases on the first, like the fourth one
I'm
down.
sorry, I was just looking at the enacting clause, section 1 and 2.
Yeah, and it says that the total project cost is 562,140.00.00. Obviously, that's a typo. And
You're referring into the whereas clause?
The whereas
Correct.
clause, yeah.
And the sections below 1 and 2 are the authorizing?
Right,
Certainly. Got it. Thank you.
yes. Thank you, Tim.
So,
Is
so
an
I'm
amendment
fine with
needed
what
or
I
no?
said?
No.
No amendments needed.
Okay.
Okay. So it's been moved to approve. Is there a second?
The motion to approve.
Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion, vote yes. Those opposed, vote no. The voting is now open.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
And the ordinance passes 8 voting yes, none voting no. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is docket number 2022-545 for emergency passage. Ordinance authorizing a purchase of 58 auto tobacco BIDT warrant cameras from Axon Enterprises, Inc. in the amount of $405,086 and a total 4-year contract amount not to exceed $724,001 for the Springfield Police Department for emergency passage.
So moved.
Chair will entertain a motion to
Second.
place agenda number 2022-545 on final passage. Been moved and second. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, vote yes. Those opposed, vote no. The voting is now open. And the
1 second, Mayor, it
Okay.
just won't, there, it finally went, thank you.
ordinance
Got the
passes
weird
9 voting
tonight.
yes, none voting no. Next item on the agenda is 2022-546, an ordinance authorizing a contract with Axon Enterprises, Inc. for purchase of virtual reality goggles for training purposes for an amount not to exceed $161,625 over a 6-year period for the Springfield Police Department for emergency passage. Chair will entertain a motion to place agenda number 2022-564 on final passage.
So move.
Second.
Been moved. Second, discussion. Alderman McMenamin.
Mr. Mayor, usually you explain the reason for the emergency.
Yep, sure.
Good evening, Alderpersons. As you may remember, one of our big initiatives for fiscal year 2023 was technology and implementation of virtual reality as it pertains to training for our officers as one of our training components. This is really a timing issue. The pricing that we're able to negotiate will expire at the end of this year as a result of their fiscal switchover at Axon. So in order to get reduced pricing, we had to put it on emergency passage.
Any other, Alderman Redpath.
Chief, is this the same technology the state police is using now?
Not 100% sure. I'm not sure what they're using. Virtual reality
Yeah.
training is becoming commonplace in various career fields, but law enforcement is certainly one of those.
It's a good program. I support it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And when we get it up and running, I would certainly invite everyone to come.
Great.
Test it out, try it out, and enjoy it. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. All in favor of the motion, vote yes. Those opposed, vote no. The voting is now open. And the ordinance passes 9 voting yes, none voting no. Is there any unfinished business come before the city council? Just a reminder, Wednesday's holiday walks, I think they begin at 5 o'clock. And then Saturday, what time are they? Saturday?
11.
Yep, 11 to 7. But there's ice skating on the Old State Capitol, thanks to Segment CEO. And appreciate everybody coming down and enjoying the holiday, as well as the memorial, sponsored by Memorial Health, with regards to the Festival of Trees downtown. Alderman Hanauer.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to take this time to congratulate the Sacred Heart Griffin football team for winning state, where they went 14-0. They had some heart attack games that took years off my life, and I also would like to take this time to congratulate Ken Leonard. He's ending his coach career, 39 years. He's the state winningest coach, and I think that we will be presenting, due to basketball, we can't get the team up here on Tuesdays, so I think we're going to be presenting them on December.
It'll be the 22nd. We had to change it.
Did it change?
Yep.
So it's the 22nd?
Yep. Between games.
At a basketball game over at school. So, but I just wanted to take time to congratulate them. It was a great season, and my son was on the team, and it was certainly exciting to be a parent to see all that. And they're a great group of kids. I think they average about GPA of 3.3, and they have just tons of service hours that they've done for the community. So they're pretty well-rounded, and good group of kids, though. So congratulations.
Put some excitement in it.
What?
I said, put some excitement in it.
It ain't they first rodeo.
Alderman Donley.
Yeah,
Try
thank
to
you,
put
Mayor.
some excitement into your comments,
Put
please.
some excitement in it.
I will put some excitement into this one, but, I think we would be remiss this evening if we didn't recognize this individual. This individual, although young at heart, is old enough to be my father. I'd like to wish Alderman Hanauer, if you'll join me, and a happy birthday tomorrow. Alderman Hanauer.
You're not that much younger than me.
Happy birthday.
Is there any other unfinished business? Any new business?
Mr. Mayor, I
Alderman
just,
McMiniman?
I think individuals saw you over at Memorial Stadium watching the Sacred Heart Griffin championship game. Is that accurate? You were over there to cheer on your high school?
Yep,
It was cold.
yep, it was.
Well, nice going.
Yeah, you wouldn't have recognized Juan Huerta. He was all bundled up. He's used to that warm weather. But there was a good crowd presence there, I think, especially on the student body side. So we appreciate everybody supporting SHG and all our high schools, especially this year through the pandemic. And, the basketball season just started, and, it's great to see everything back in action. So thank you very much. And then new business, just a reminder, Pearl Harbor Day is tomorrow, and there's a memorial out at the Elks Club at 11 o'clock. And then also the Economic Community Development Commission meeting is tomorrow at 11:30, and I think you received a packet from Adirondack. That was the housing project that was referenced tonight, and they'll be here to give a presentation, and then they'll come back, of course, to give a presentation to the council. Any other new business? Alderman McMiniman, or do you have anything else?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody signed up to speak?
No.
Is there anybody wish to address the council? If you come forward and state your name and address for the council, we'd appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Terrence Lawson, for who don't know me. I got a few questions about the timing of permits and licensing that no one seems to know the timing about.
Is it for just building permits or?
Well, I'm a landlord,
Okay.
and I rent to different people, and it seems like every time we get a new tenant, they kind of hold the license up, no email back or anything. Called a few different aldermen. They seem not to know. the timing of those type of things. So I'm just trying to get a sense of timing here.
Okay, if it's a business related, Nate Bottom probably could speak to it, but it depends on the condition of the building. If it's, if it's liquor license related, that's a different process.
Right.
So it just depends on the, we did have a situation with Booth Ferguson. There was a restaurant trying to move into there, and there's a lot of building issues associated with that particular property. So if you want, we can, get the name of the business or the particular entities, and we can check into it.
Well, I have one of my tenants here.
Okay.
And she's been in contact with her lawyer, and they've been in contact with the city, and it's no response from the city on when she will be able to proceed with her license. Just trying to see if you guys got something, And then it's a few questions was asked to her.
Okay.
I feel like wasn't appropriate, so I'm just trying to figure out what do we need to do to get some speed behind the situation.
Okay. Yeah, I know if it's liquor related, we did change the process a while back to make sure that, one, we're checking with the landlord themselves, and then also with the business proprietor. And so that has taken an additional amount of time, but outside of that, I'm not sure what the situation would be, but we can check it after this meeting and give you an answer.
Okay.
Alderman Williams?
Yes, so I would like, I'd like to hear from the young lady, because I, Mayor, have been contacted, and I'm deferring to the Alderwoman, it's her ward, but I have been contacted about the timeline issues and the timeliness of this situation. So I would like her to explain how long this has been going on, and in fact, if there has been unanswered emails, I don't like the city to look like that. So I want the city, I just want to know a little bit more about what actually has taken place to get you here tonight.
Hello, my name is Marquita Johnson. I actually purchased Wet Bar LLC. So it's just basically transferring everything over to me. That whole procedure started in September. They received everything from me. I received notice that all my backgrounds had passed. My manager's backgrounds had passed. There were some issues with the lease from TL Holdings. We resolved that. My attorney spoke with, I think his name was Nicholas, the attorney for the city, I believe, and it was some things that he asked for. Everything has been turned in. So the last week of October, I was advised that it was taken up to the commission, and they were waiting for that. I sent the email myself out to Todd Oliver on November 9th. He responded back that he hadn't heard anything. So I kind of let my attorney handle everything, and he says that he has not received any type of emails back to find out if there's anything else that's needed or what's the next step.
Yeah, we can check on the status of it tomorrow and let you know. As far as that goes, I mean, the status, I don't know, Corporation Counsel, if...
No, I think there are several issues that relate to this. I'd be happy to talk with both of you, maybe privately.
Okay.
And I know that there's been several emails back and forth with your attorney. I think the SPD has been involved in some of this discussion. And it relates to the transfer of the 3 a.m. and who the investors are in the business.
Okay.
So I think the attorney, I think, is aware of some of this. But we can certainly meet and go over it. I think also, I think most of that has been resolved.
Yes, because he asked for a proof of proof of funds, and we got all that.
I think some of that has been submitted. Nick has been out with COVID, and both Todd also has been out, had a pretty serious surgery. So I think we're in a position, but I'd be happy to meet and go through all of the issues, because there are some concerns about that have been raised that we can certainly talk about, but this is not the appropriate place to do that.
Okay. Do you know when a better time is?
We could do it tomorrow or Thursday or Friday.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. We can reach out or set up a time. Yep.
I want
Happy
to
to
let
do
him
it.
speak first. Just let Terrence speak first.
In this instance, is it appropriate, or is it a ordinance that you guys ask for proof of funds and doing that type of transaction?
I'm sorry?
Is it an ordinance or is it procedure to ask for proof of funds?
We have, yes.
So, I mean, I'm just want to know, is everybody getting the same type of?
Where there have been issues that have been raised, yes, absolutely.
Alderwoman Purchase.
Thank you, Mayor. I received a call right before we got here to City Council about this situation today, and I know I brought up in the past about us just being responsive, like Corporation Council just said, even if there's some concerns or we need to look into some more stuff, can we just be responsive and let them know that? Because I was told that they have called 16 times and haven't gotten a return call back.
No,
So
I
that
think
was just a
I
little
think there's
alarming
been
to me.
multiple communications.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other discussion? Is there anybody else wish to address the council? Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. We're adjourned.
I can't make it to the landfill today.
Thank you, Roy.